shower look clothes on, I assure you of that. So welcome back to my channel. My name is Joanne, the Learner Lawyer. It is Easter Saturday. Where is the year gone? It is going so fast. Things have stopped. I have 2 weeks now of nothing, 2 weeks break, and uni to do. But look, at the moment, we want to look at this article about, because Katie Joy gets a mention in this article. Now, I want to remind you that you need to remember that everybody has a bias. There's a bias in articles, and like Katie Joy, we know, has a bias. So I have a bias. So everyone has a bias. Now, this is called Miss Midwest Christian Outreach. Now, what I'm finding very interesting about this is that we find out a little bit more about this photo that Katie Joy posted on Bill Gothard and John MacArthur. Now, I have to say, some of the stuff I have in the past sat and listened to some of John MacArthur's stuff, and I've actually liked it. Other times I've gone, no, don't agree with that. So, you know, you got to just, you know, but anyway, this is an article that says, inquiring minds want to know the mystery photo. So this is going to talk about this mystery photo because it has been alleged that Katie Joy did not have permission from the owner or the person that took the photo to share the photo. So this is dated the 6th of April. This is by somebody called Ron Hensel on this Mid-Christian Outreach site, because my PayPal thing is there. Let me see if I can remove it so you can see. There we go, Midwestern Christian Outreach. Okay, it's from their site. So we know that there could be a bias towards the organisation that's posting this. You've got to remember that what Katie Joy posts also has a bias. So it's, you know, you have to, you know, a lot of times you actually have to go through a whole pile of information and sort of pick out what is, you know, try and find or make up your own mind. So this is really just to help you make up your own mind. So it says, Mark Twain once said, all you need in this life is ignorance and confidence, then success is sure. I like this because he uses footnotes. So if we go down here, Katie Joy, and like it's funny because she calls out, oh, she says, no, talks about her mentions. She's not mentioned this. We have plenty of evidence that this axiom works. We even have a word for people who live by it on social media, influencers. True, there are influencers who seem to care about actual fact. But in today's world of instant social media gratification, driven by dopamine hits users get from numbers of likes on their post, to when your brain, from the Business Insider. So again, this is the this is Mark Twain penned this amusing remark in a letter dated the 7th of December 1887, which he sent to Mrs. Foote. The letter was reprinted in the LA Times, March 16, 1930, also in 1934. A facsimile of the missive appeared in the book When Huck Finn Went Highbrow by Benjamin de Cazares, with a limited edition of $125. Then it says, what happens when your brain goes on dopamine? Okay, so we've got that. Okay. So maybe if I can just scroll over it. Yep, so that is from a book called What Happens to Your Brain When You Get a Like on Instagram. Facts are often buzzkills. If you want to breathe the rarefied air of influencers, Mount Olympus, you need to focus on projecting confidence. One communications media trainer even has an article titled How to Speak Confidently When You Don't Know What You're Talking About. And that's the book there. And that's your ticket. If anyone projects confidence, it's Rachel Den Hollander. You can see it in her public presentation skills on YouTube videos, and it carries over to her Twitter account. She conveyed a great deal of confidence, for example, on the 9th of February 2023, when she tweeted that Bill Gothard had significant influence on John MacArthur and that their association thick. And here is their, where that's again. Noting his close association with Bill Gothard and IBLP during the Gothard era, which explicitly taught a highly rigid view of husband as the mediator and purveyor of God's will and blessings to his wife and child is highly relevant. Rachel, could you cite your source on the close connection between MacArthur and Gothard? Everything I'm finding suggests MacArthur has always spoken pretty critically of Gothard, though honestly I'm not finding much. And Rachel says, Recovering Grace has some of the photographic evidence. They were closely aligning during that era. I also have first-hand information directly from individuals involved in both ministries at the time. There is much about IBLP's history that is faded or not known anymore. Response. I mean, what kind of photographs? I'm not trying to irritate you, but I'm sure as a lawyer, you know that two people in a room together in a photograph doesn't suggest a close association. They could have just been at the same social function. To which Rachel says, photographs in Gothard's office with evangelical leaders. MacArthur was close enough that in the 80s, when the first scandal broke, he pushed for mediation with CLS to try and resolve claims of abuse. Gothard rejected predictably. IBLP has scrubbed a lot. Again, TBC. And then they were certainly not aligned on everything. So there you go. So that was a post. So somebody, called out this one. So anyway, as she exuded supreme confidence in a series of tweets about a month later, on March 8, 2023, in which she alleged that MacArthur had close association with Bill Gothard and IBLP during the Gothard era, by which she seems to be accurately referring to the 1970s, the decade in which this writer graduated junior high school, abandoned agnosticism for faith in Christ, graduated high school, attended Bible college, and got married. Megan Basham of the Daily Wire replied to this. Rachel, could you source on the close connection between MacArthur and Gothard? Everything on file suggests MacArthur has always been pretty critical of Gothard, though honestly not finding much. So again, another journalist. As Den Hollander responded, Recovering Grace, a site devoted to holding Bill Gothard accountable, and there we go, has some of the photographic evidence. They were closely aligned during that. I have first-hand information directly from individuals involved in both ministries at the time. There is much about IBLP's history that has faded or is not well known anymore. This raised an obvious question for Basham, who followed up with, what type of photographs? I'm not trying to irritate you, but I'm sure as a lawyer, you know that two people in a room together in a photograph could suggest a close association. They doesn't suggest a close association. Could have just been at the same social function. DeLander replied, photographs in Gothard's office with evangelical leaders. MacArthur was close enough in the 80s that when the first scandal broke, he pushed for mediation with CLS to try and resolve the claims of abuse. Gothard rejected this, predictably. IBLP has scrubbed a lot. Again, TBC. They're certainly not aligned on everything. So in addition to claiming MacArthur was closely associated and aligned with Gothard, Den Hollander served up the assertion that Recovering Grace has photographic evidence. And she, a seasoned, what just happened there? Oh, don't know what happened there. What happened there? Okay. So, in addition, with claiming MacArthur was closely associated and aligned with Gothard, Den Hollander served up the assertion that Recovering Grace has photographic evidence, and she seasoned that with a reference to another allegation concerning MacArthur and the Christian Legal Society. She also mentions something about photographs in Gothard's office, but unless she's talking about his home office, Gothard was terminated from his Institute of Baseballs in 2014. That's probably going to be the hardest detail to objectively verify. This was the only This was the only trail of breadcrumbs she left back to her alleged source. I must admit I was intrigued. But before I had a chance to follow the breadcrumbs, a little over 3 hours later, after Den Hollander referred Basham to Recovering Grace, Christine Pack provided a photograph. That's Solar Sisters. From a different source, a Facebook page called Without a Crystal Ball, run by Katie Joy Paulson, aka Catherine Paulson. Here we go. I've never seen the image in Paulson's tweeted Facebook post before, and while I'd heard of Christine Pack, she has a long history of attacking John MacArthur on her Twitter account, so much that on the 25th of February 2023 she felt compelled to tweet, "I don't hate John MacArthur, in fact, I used to be a huge supporter. Then I read a shocking things about him, documented things. They begin to pile up until I couldn't explain them away." I had no idea who Paulson was or what her Facebook page was about. He says she also has an Instagram account, a YouTube channel, and a website that isn't nearly as interesting as the other three. The image posted on February 10th, 2023 is overlaid with text labelling Bill Gothard and John MacArthur, along with the caption at the bottom that reads, "John MacArthur and Bill Gothard at a conference at the IBLP's Northwoods campus." When I first saw it, I posted a comment seeking more information about the photo, but I never saw a response. All right. And I discovered this wasn't the first time Paulson posted this image. It turned up in a Facebook post from November 10, 2022, only this time with different labels, that one that read Gothard and the other MacArthur, with corresponding arrows drawn to the image of each man's head, and the caption that reads Bill Gothard and John MacArthur at Institute in Basic Life Principles Northwood Centre Conference. There we go. Since the labels and captions are consistent with Paulson's unique meme style, and since they use different words for the same background image on separate occasions, I assumed this meant she possessed a copy of the original photo. But I had no idea where the original photo came from. Rod Stewart. Every picture tells a story, don't it? Rod Stewart sang these words in 1971. I don't think it was his best song, nor do I think its ending refrain is true. Pictures don't tell stories as they illustrate stories people tell. And people frequently use pictures to illustrate stories they want you to believe rather than what the pictures actually represent. So what story does Paulson want us to believe based on this picture? For starters, according to her November 2022 post, she wants us to believe that while MacArthur can't stand Gothard today, the two pals were quite chummy back in the day. So chummy, in fact, that MacArthur even travelled to Gothard's Michigan Conference Centre for conferences. So boys and girls, take it from someone who has professional opinions on the matter. Regardless of what you may have heard, once upon a time, they were pals, even the quite chummy kind. And in her February 2023 post, and it says, the post has since been deleted following Paulson's correspondence with the photograph's owner, as explained below. Yes, she's had to delete them. She called the photo receipts for proof that John MacArthur and Bill Gothard ran in the same circles and participated in seminars together. The photo proves it, right? Shared in the context of Rachel Den Hollander's Twitter thread, the image was obviously being used by Pack to provide evidence of Den Hollander's contention that J-Mac was tight with Billy G back in the Gothard era of the 70s. The apparent ages, hairstyles, clothing, and style of eyeglasses, cringe, the writer had a pair of them, of those in the picture are consistent with that decade. But I remembered another song from the 70s, one I actually liked, in which Ringo Starr said, saying, "All I got is this photograph, because this photograph was the only tangible evidence I had to go on at this point." Even considering Den Hollander's reference to CLS, just one single photo. And unlike Ringo, I had no idea what the photo I was looking at meant, other than at some point in time, Bill Gothard and John MacArthur were in the same room together. MacArthur and friends, Gothard and friends. But notice, who hasn't been mentioned so far? A good look at the photo. According to Paulson, Pack, and apparently Den Hollander, frame this photographic evidence, its significance centres on the alleged relationship between Gothard and MacArthur, but are they really central to the story this picture tells? For me, at first sight, this picture tells a different story. Maybe it's because I'm as old as the first seasons of Twilight Zone, The Bullwinkle Show, The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, and because for me, this sucks. I don't really want to be editing this. For me, at first sight, this picture tells a different story. Maybe it's because I'm as old as the first seasons of The Twilight Zone, The Bullwinkle Show, The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis, and because for me the 70s sometimes seems like 20 minutes ago. But I can't help to notice that those now using it seem to completely ignore the fact that someone far more famous among Christians at that time was in the room commanding everyone's attention. Oh, look who that is. Oh, I just noticed it. The first thing I noticed when I look at it is that at that moment the photo was taken, Gothard's gaze was fixed squarely on Joni Erickson. She's now married. Turns out she hadn't met her future husband, Ken Tarder, yet when this photo was taken. So it was it that two men wanted to get their photo taken with her, as no doubt as everyone else was. That guy behind the wheelchair was merely basking in her reflected glory. And why not? She was the only one in the room who had been interviewed by Barbara Walters on the Today Show in 1974. She was the only one in the room who had a best-selling autobiography, Joni, The Unforgettable Story, which her publisher solicited as a result of the Walters interview in 1976. Again, the updated version of the book's on Amazon. She was the only one in the room who starred in an autobiographical feature film, Joni, 1979. There we go. All on top of that, being the only one in the room who could create beautiful, marketable paintings using a paintbrush held between her teeth. And she could sing too. But then I would expect those who weren't even born yet to understand that Joni was the real celebrity in the room. Gothard had much more to gain from feigning a close association with Joni than some of what's-his-name pastor hardly outside the LA area would recognise until the 80s. For all of us boomers and our parents, Joni would have been a big deal, although if her pastor wanted to tag along, I suppose we'd have given him a listen. I'm sure her awesome coolness would have rubbed off on him enough for that. Looking back on it, while I realise our generations were responsible for destroying the planet and everything still, conveniently admitting this part of the historical context in order to craft a narrative feels like an ageist microaggression to me. Shouldn't I be deeply and profoundly wounded or something? A long time ago in an evangelical galaxy far, far away. So, was MacArthur a mercenary for the evil Gothardite Empire? Or was he really a princess during his biblical Jedi Knight? Has the truth behind this photo been lost in the mists of time? How was I ever going to find out why those three were in the same room in those days before the light sermon became an elegant weapon for a more civilized age? Is there some kind of Millennium Falcon I can hitch a ride on to look for these answers? I know literally everyone in the photo is still alive, but I couldn't pick up the phone and call J Mac or Joni and ask them, could I? And for some reason, calling Billy G didn't seem like the wisest course of action, even though, or more accurately, because of the fact he's the one I've met with face-to-face at least 4 times and have had numerous phone calls and email exchanges with. No, not going to go there. I don't think I'd get the straight dope from him, but I wasn't without my options. As many of you know, my good friends Don and Joy Valent and I wrote a book together called A Matter of Basic Principles, Bill Gothard and the Christian Life. That was theirs. For the most part, I was working on my MA in Biblical Studies and had our Gothard library stored at my house at the time. I handled the biblical and theological portions, and Don and Joy handled the narrative parts. And this worked great because Don is a consummate networker. Legend has it that one day Don was in Rome chatting with the Pope, and everyone was saying, "Who is that guy?" And someone said, "Oh, I don't know who that guy in white is, but the guy next to him is Don Venoit. If everyone on this planet has 6 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon, I'm pretty sure most evangelicals have no more than 1 or 2 from Don. He's met like half of everyone. He knows people, and he knows people who knows people. Some of them Don had introduced me to. I know a guy." One of the people Don interviewed for our book was Lani Gabriel. From the 1st of January 1979 through June 30, 1980, Lani was employed by Gothard's Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts, IBYC, which was later renamed to the Institute of Basic Life Principles. His job? Lani co-piloted Gothard's own Millennium Falcon, a Lear 35A jet, alongside his boss, pilot Lynn Ernst. I won't say he played Chewbacca to Lynn's Han Solo because I've already used too many Star Wars references, and Lani looks something like a Wookiee. Lani, or Lan, I don't know, I'm sorry for pronunciation, was also the main pilot for the IBYC's, IBLP's MU-2J turboprop airplane. During his 18 months with the Institute, Lan flew 455 of his 27,259 career flight hours. Those 455 flight hours included 127 trips to the Institute's Northwoods Conference Center in Watersmeet, Michigan. That wasn't Lani's only connection to Gothard. He attended his first basic life seminar in 1972, and after the first Gothard sex scandal erupted in 1980, Lani married one of the primary victims of that scandal, Gothard's former secretary, Ruth Dessel, who left the Institute that year. Along with Lani, they had 2 children together. So this is her, Ruth Dessel. Sadly, Ruth passed away from breast cancer in 1994. The Recovering Grace website features an article Lani wrote titled Ruth's Story. In the process of writing our book in the late 90s and early 2000s, Don consulted extensively with Lani. By that time, the 1980 sex scandal was just a distant memory for most people, and later charges against Gothard were still years away from surfacing. We covered the scandal in our book, but it wasn't our primary focus. We chose instead to focus on whether Gothard lived by his own teachings, whether those teachings are biblical, and how Gothard's teachings and behaviour affected other people. We concluded that his teachings did not produce the spiritual fruit he advertised because they are not found in Scripture. Because of this, and since Lani's children were all still very young, neither Ruth's story nor Lani's name appeared in our book. But Lani was the first person I thought of when trying to figure out where this photo came from. I called Lani and explained and described the photo to him. Could he recall any time he saw Gothard, MacArthur, and Joni in the same room together at the Northwoods Conference Center, as the photo depicts? Oh, yes. Yes, he remembered a time when they were together at the NCC, so whatever I saw in that photo actually happened. How does he know? He flew both Joni and J-Mac to the event, which kind of figures when you think about it. Like all good pilots, Lani keeps a flight log. That's how I was able to spout out all those stats about his flying times earlier. According to Lani's log, on August 31, 1979, Lani and Lynn Ernst picked up Joni at Chicago's airport in the Institute's Learjet and flew her up to the NCC, landing on the strip adjacent to the main building, which has a hangar. He also recalls flying MacArthur to the same event, but at a different time. So not only do I know a guy, but I know a guy who was there. Could he find a record of him flying MacArthur? Well, no. When it came to he only recorded the names of Gothard, staff members, and VIPs. Sorry, John. You went on Lani's VIP list in 1979, but Joni sure was. Lani's mum was really excited when she heard her son would be flying her. She'd been a huge fan of hers since Barbara Wawa. Not meant to insult, just an affectionate 70s SNL Gilda Radner reference designed to trigger millennials. Interviewed Joni on the Today Show. Now he could show his mum the flight record. It was fun getting to know Lani. What I learned in my first of several long calls to him was that in addition to being a pilot, a World War II history buff, someone with connections to the Gothard seminars going back to 1972, and one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet, is that he knows a thing or two about photography. You know, I remember taking photos of that event Lani sent on the phone. The event he was referring to was the Institute's annual Labour Day staff retreat, a fun time for the Institute families to get away and recharge their batteries before going back to work on the full season of seminars. And one of the fun things they did, in addition to volleyball, horseback riding, boating and whatnot, was hear from guest speakers. The thing is, I have all the photos on slides, so I have to scan them before I can send them to you. The next day he texted me the first he scanned. I had not yet sent Lani a copy of Paulson's main photos. I found the fact that he bullseyed it on the first try within 24 hours quite impressive. Yeah, it was the exact photo found in the meme, but uncropped. But the uncropped original version, which Lani had brightened up with a bit of his software because he thought it was a bit too dark. So it probably wasn't the same copy Paulson used, except this one was darker. So this is originally scanned version of a photographic slide taken by Bill Gothard's pilot Lani Gabriel during the Labour Day 1979 staff retreat in Basic Youth Conflicts, now Institute Basic Life Principles, Northwoods Conference Centre, showing Bill Gothard left, John MacArthur top right, and Jody Erickson bottom. Red lines and margins at the top and the bottom are artefacts of the scanning process. So can you see that? The lines. The version of the image I received also showed artifacts from the scanning process, red thin lines at the top and the bottom, and parts of the slides frame above and below those lines. These features may not have been included in whatever version Paulson had in their possession, but nevertheless, all these details help to establish Lani as the source of the photo. The photo also shows it was definitely not one of Gothard's seminars. They were in a room at a recently completed NCC. It wasn't usually used for formal gatherings. The partially opened windows behind show a beautiful forested late summer day. Everyone's dressed semi-casually, not in standard seminar apparel. In fact, one of the first things I noticed when I first saw Paulson's version in early March was at Gothard's clothing. I'd spent a lot of hours with him and seen countless photos of him, but until that moment I'd never seen him not wearing a blue suit. He was wearing a sweater and no tie. Initially, I wondered whether he'd been photoshopped into someone else's body. In the sea of online Gothard images, this is perhaps the most unusual, but how did Paulson get it? So again, these are photos, right? So these are obviously on the plane. The two men in black, the two men in the back of the jet were designed to help Joni get on and off the aircraft. Then there's Lani. So this is the pilot. So this is the owner of the photograph. Use and use directed. One thing was clear. The photo that was Lani's intellectual property, and Paulson did not have permission to use it. Lani contacted Paulson by email, explained this to her, and requested she removed it from her Facebook page. I found the meme written over the photo to be misleading, he wrote, and I know of no other time when MacArthur and Gothard met in my 18 months on staff as a corporate pilot. Lani forwarded the text of his email exchange to me. On the 30th of March 2023, she responded to Lani's request as follows. I was provided the photo by admins of the Recovering Grace website. Many of them worked for the IBLP and were very clear that MacArthur and Gothard were around each other more than once. The photo used is with their permission. I was given insight to the relationship between Gothard and MacArthur. Nothing is inaccurate that the two were at a conference. Thank you. Lani replied, just to be clear, I did not give permission for them to share it outside of the intended purpose. Please remove your photo from your site. It's interesting that she wants to argue with the person who's saying that they own the photo. So here we go. In the ensuring back and forth, Paulson expressed perplexity over why Lani was bothered by her use of his image. She wrote, I did not misrepresent the situation, and your photo has been shared online in many places. Many places? Really? I've done searches on Google, Bing, Yahoo, and some others, but I haven't found it, including on the Recovering Grace website. Although I don't believe those search results would include private Facebook pages. And you'd think somebody who was actually there, as Lani was, and produced the image in the first place would know whether she was misrepresenting the situation it depicts. In any case, Lani responds, since you acknowledge that Recovering Grace provided the photo, it is evident that you made the meme. I own the photo and feel your meme strongly misrepresents the intent of the photo and why I shared it with RG. I am insisting you remove it from your sites. RG did not have my permission to share it of its internal intended use. After she quibbled over the definition of meme and told Lani she had archived the image on Instagram, Lani reiterated his demand that she delete the image completely, indicating RG did not have my permission to share it outside its internal intended use. She was clearly displeased about it, but she did remove it from Facebook from February 10th, 2023. As of writing this, however, she has not removed her earlier Facebook post with the image from November 10, 2022. I would hope she would complete her acquiescence to Lani's legitimate request by deleting all her copies. Now, my question was, assuming her claim was accurate, who at Recovering Grace sent it to her? Katie Joy, just take it down. Just take it down. All smoke, no gun. My next step was to contact the admin team of Recovery website with the photo. I had already conducted searches of their site and not found any images of MacArthur, let alone photographic evidence of a relationship between him and Gothard. Over the following couple of days, after they told me they had no record of ever receiving the photo and that they went through their team email and Facebook messages, and they told me that they don't have any correspondence between us and Katie Joy, Catherine Crystal Ball, we couldn't remember giving permission to use the photo and don't see any correspondence. So after several message exchanges with them, email, text, and phone with Lani at this point, I was left with a mystery. We know Lani sent photos to RG 9 years ago. Some of them are on the website, but was this one of them? In her first Facebook post, Paulson said she'd received a photo from a former follower of Bill Gothard, who then left the IBLP to follow John MacArthur, then abandoned both. In her second, now deleted Facebook post, she said it was sent to her by an IPLB survivor and victim of Bill Gothard. In neither post did she mention Recovering Grace, nor do I find reference to RG in comments of the remaining post. This raises a question. Why did Den Holler indicate that photographic evidence of post-Gothard-MacArthur connection during the Gothard era was available through Recovering Grace when RG has no such photos on its website? B, their admins have no records of receiving, let alone sending anyone such photos. C, the only such photographic evidence was posted on Paulson's Without a Crystal Ball account. And D, the first time, as far as I can remember, RG was connected to that evidence was in a private email from Paulson to Lani. Did Dolan Hollander get this idea directly from Paulson, like Lani did? Shuddered passed through my body. I mean, like, have you ever seen one of Paulson's web pages? It says, feast your eyes on her Without a Crystal Ball website, Facebook page, Instagram, and channel. When Agent K grabbed a stack of tabloid newspapers in Men in Black in 97, and Agent J said, these are hot sheets, and K responded, best investigative journalism on the planet. That was satire. I wish I could say Paulson's sites were. Memories pressed between the web pages of my mind. Apologies to Elvis Presley and his songwriters Mac Davis and Billy Strange. More than 20 years after we wrote our book, many of those we interviewed concerning the first Gothard sex scandal that erupted publicly in 1980 are still with us, still in contact with us, and their memories remain intact. Former staff members from those tumultuous times have held periodic reunions over the years, and they heard rumours that MacArthur supported Gothard, but they didn't confirm that with him or his church. One former staff member who made it into our book is Tony Gurr. In the 70s, served as an MC for a video seminar held in Gothard's absence, who conducted an internal of sexual wrongdoings and presented his findings to the IBYC board on the 13th of May 1980. Tony confirms that guest speakers were often brought in to speak at staff retreats and chapels, not because they were supporters of the Institute, but because they had name recognition in evangelical circles. Or Eep, the popular founder of Back to the Bible, spoke at the 1978 Labor Day staff retreat. I used to listen to his radio program and don't recall a single time he taught Gothard's unique doctrines. Agreement with Gothard was not a prerequisite for being invited, and this resulted in some interesting encounters between him and guest speakers. One year, a personal friend of mine, Richard Owen Roberts of the International Awakening, was invited to speak in a series of staff chapels. About halfway through the series, Gothard sent a staff memo to tell Roberts he couldn't continue unless he shaved off his beard. This led to a confrontation in which Roberts told Gothard, "The problem with you, Bill, is that you elevate your personal opinions to the level of scripture." Tony and I both heard this account directly from Roberts on separate occasions. He never spoke of it again, and last I heard, he still has a beard. According to Tony, sometime around 78 or 79, theologian Charles Ryrie spoke at some weekend staff chapels, but before he did, Gothard had Tony fly down to Dallas and personally deliver a copy of his advanced seminar textbook to Ryrie for his review. Perhaps he was trying to make an impression. Well, he did, understandably. After reading it, Ryrie decided to speak on the topic of law and grace. On the last day of those chapels during the question and answer time, Tony asked Ryrie how he would characterize someone who taught that Christians should neither eat pork nor raise pork for others to eat. He had a reason for asking that. He was from a family of hog farmers, and Gothard had put pressure on Tony to convince him to abandon that business because he teaches that the Old Testament prohibition of pork still applies to Christians. Ryrie responded that he would characterize such a person as a false teacher. Gothard was sitting in the front row. He was not pleased. I suppose if someone has photos of any of these events, they could scan and upload them as photographic evidence of these men's close associations with Gothard. They could make memes out of them to let everyone know that they were pals, or who were quite chummy the day, but they would be lying. Who did the pushing? This leaves one final allegation made by Den Hollander. MacArthur was close enough in the 80s when the first scandal broke. He pushed for mediation with the CLS, Christian Legal Society, to try and resolve the claims of abuse. The evidence that's been freely available on the Recovering Grace website since 2014 tells a different story. MacArthur's name doesn't come up in the context of the scandal until well after a year after it broke. And when it did, it wasn't he who was doing the pushing. On the 2nd of November 1981, Samuel E. Erickson wrote the following to Bill Gothard on the CLS letterhead on a visit to Grace Community Church a few weeks ago. John MacArthur shared with me some material sent to him regarding some concerns in respect to the Institute. In view of the fact that the possible litigation was contemplated, I suggested to John that he refer the concerned parties to the Christian Legal Society, in particular its Christian Conciliation Services. A copy of this letter was obtained from Rebuff, Other Peacemakers, so that's from Recovering Grace. And you can see that, so that's where he's got it. So it wasn't a case of MacArthur pushing anything. He was simply trying to get someone off his desk. And Erickson, who was a former member of his church in town to pay a visit, helped him out. But who was that someone? It takes the time, if one takes time to carefully examine documentation on RG, it becomes apparent the one who was pushing for this here, Gerald Wisby, or YB. It was Tony Guerra's uncle, Gerald YB, who was copied in on Erickson's letter. See the links in the heading, original letters and documents, particularly the ones labelled a rather humorous and pointed letter from Gerald Wilby, Tony's uncle, to Gothard, and a brief note showing that Wilby had already been pushing for Gothard for an independent examination of the YBYC ministry, and that letters to that effect had been exchanged. So after discussing this with Lani, Tony, and Gothard's former seminar administrator and participant in the lawsuit against Gothard in the early 80s, Bill Wood, with whom I spoke at length, our consensus is that the person most likely to have sent MacArthur the material to which Erickson was referring to was Wiebe. If anything, the ex-staffers caught up in dispute and laid a lawsuit against Gothard were disappointed over the lack of involvement they saw in high-profile pastors like MacArthur. Here's the footnote. I spoke with David Henke, founder of Watchman Fellowship, who wrote a paper titled A Summary Report, Bill Gothard's Institute in Basic Life Principles. which he said when efforts at accountability and reconciliation were frustrated, Reverend John MacArthur of Grace Community Church recommended that the Christian Legal Society be invited to provide impartial arbitration through its Christian Conciliation Service. He informed me that he based this statement on second-hand information he came across in his research, and there's the text there. Which leaves me to type one loose end. MacArthur takes my questions. After working on this for several days and having gathered quite a bit of information, it occurred to me that there is one person I needed to hear from. Had anyone bothered with the subject of their rumours and gossip innuendos based entirely on a single misappropriated photo? I think there might be something in the Bible about that. But don't worry, because Katie Joy, she doesn't believe in the Bible. Anyway, I asked Don to contact Phil Johnson to see if he would pass on my questions to John MacArthur. Phil promptly replied in the affirmative. A few hours later, I emailed him my questions. The following afternoon, Phil came back. John came in to record this morning, so I asked him your questions. Since he was in the studio, we simply recorded his replies. I'll get that segment of the recording and send it to you. You are free to quote verbatim and publish any of John's replies. Later that evening, Phil sent me a nearly 9-minute audio recording of him asking questions to MacArthur and MacArthur responding. I made a transcript of which I copied him and others on. What follows is a relevant portion of the transcript, nearly 7 minutes of the recording. Phil Johnson. So Rachel Den Hollander and her husband have been persistent in insisting that there's a long-term tie between John MacArthur and Bill Gothard. So someone said in this picture of you with Johnny and Gothard, let me read it to you. John MacArthur, that's the only time I was ever with him. Johnson, yes, I know that. MacArthur, and I had to carry her down the stairs. Johnson, he had you speak to his staff, as I recall. MacArthur, it wasn't one of his seminars. Johnson, so Ron Hensel says I've spoken to 2 individuals who were present when the photo was taken. Lani Gabriel, who was Gothard's pilot who took the original photo, and Tony Gurr, a former staffer of Gothard. They confirmed that this was simply an informal staff retreat over Labor Day in 1979, and Joni and Pastor MacArthur were the guest speakers. Lani says he piloted the plane, which he said transported John MacArthur's kids because Tony took them fishing. Does that sound... I don't remember the details that far back. Anyway, so he has a few questions. Number 1, do you recall the details of the 1979 retreat? MacArthur, yes, some of them. Johnson, talk about that. What happened? MacArthur, yeah, I was asked along with Jody Erickson Tarter to speak to their staff. It wasn't one of his basic youth conflict things, which is what he called those. Johnson, right, MacArthur conferences, but to speak to staff. So Joni and I went and we did that. I remember carrying her physically in my arms down the staircase in his retreat centre that they had. So this is, nothing was really ethical or expositional. It was all analogical. And they would pick whatever illustration gave them to the point they wanted to make. So I think that was the big lesson. Of course, at that point, I realised that this was in some way sub-Christian because it wasn't in Scripture. So that's what John MacArthur referred to his teachings. But it says 2 things stand out to me. One was a conversation with Bill Gothard's father, and I said to him in private conversation, we were going in a car somewhere. I said, what do you believe about eternal security? What do you believe in salvation? Can you lose your salvation, or is it eternal life? And he said, well, no, you can't lose your salvation. And then he followed that with that meaning, once you're born, you can't be unborn. And that was my introduction to a system where everything they believed was predicated on an analogy. Whether you can be born again physically has nothing to do with the theology of salvation. You could, if you wanted to say, you could lose your salvation. You could come up with the analogy that would cause you to believe you could lose it. Everything that was in their system, their entire system was built on that, birds and animals and all these endless analogies. We were walking by the pen of Canadian geese, and I asked Bill about divorce. We were talking about divorce because they had divorce. No time ever for anybody. And he said, the reason we believe that, take a look at those Canadian geese. We clip their wings. We clip their wings and they stay right there. If we don't clip their wings, they'll fly away. So you can't give people any means by which they can exit a marriage. So this is another classic illustration of what they did, everything. Nothing was really executable or expositional. It was all analogical. They would pick whatever illustration gave them and point they wanted to make. So I think that was the big lesson. Of course, at that point, I realised in some ways this was sub-Christian because it wasn't based on Scripture. Johnson said, yeah, in fact, when I came here in 83, one of the things I asked you about during our first weeks was your opinion on Gothard, and you were pretty clear by 1983 you didn't affirm him in any way. MacArthur, no. Johnson, and you told me that story about the Canadian geese. MacArthur, yes. We never promoted any of his seminars. Once I met him and saw the reality of how they formulated their convictions, I could see this is problematic. And of course, then as time went on, I had no relationship to him whatsoever after that event. And until this day today, I've not even had a conversation with him. Johnson, yeah, all right. So you pretty much answered some of those questions he was asking. Did the members of Grace Church attend basic seminars in the 70s and 80s? And if so, did Grace Church encourage it, discourage it, or simply remain neutral? MacArthur, we did not. We were not partnering with them in any way. Johnson, did you ever attend a Gothard seminar? You've already answered that too, I think. MacArthur, yeah, no. I think there was one in a Long Beach one time. I remember going there for one session, but it lasted for days, so I never sat through the whole seminar. Johnson, were you familiar with what was in his red notebook? MacArthur, well, some of it. The idea that you could do what your parents told you, and he had drawings of a hammer and a nail, and your parents were the hammer and you were the nail, and you went the way that they wanted you to go. Some of those things were commonly known to people. You always obeyed your parents no matter what the circumstances are. And that's all, folks. Well, just about all. The main reason I contacted Bill Wood was because Lani thought that if anyone would know whether MacArthur had been at the seminar, he would. As Lani put it, at the seminars, everyone knew Bill Wood was in charge. He oversaw logistics. I didn't realise by the time I called it, I would already have heard in MacArthur's own recorded voice that he had attended one session in Long Beach. But why, I wondered, would someone attend just one session of a 6-day seminar after paying for the whole week? It turns out he wouldn't have had to pay for it if it was one-day minister seminar, which were held in advance of the regular seminars and were used by the Institute to promote them, and they were free. But now it seems more obvious that MacArthur was at the 1979 IBYC Labour Day staff retreat, primarily because he was Joni Eareckson's pastor, not because he had any relationship to Gothard, especially not that one of Gothard's followers. Well, an unknown pastor in the LA area, he didn't yet have the national name recognition somebody like Theodore Epp or Charles Riley, or especially Joni at that time. According to Grace CU's website, his sermons only started to be broadcast outside of California in 1977, and then seemingly by accident. I don't recall hearing his sermons in Chicago until the 1980s. The big draw in 1979 would have been Joni. Well, saddened that I found this necessary, I'm deeply grateful for Phil Johnson and John MacArthur for the cooperation they showed in assisting me as I sought to follow the principles Scripture teaches for dealing with what was once referred to as talebearing. And I truly enjoyed the time I spent interviewing Lani Gabriel, Tony Gurr, and Bill Wood, without whom this article wouldn't have been possible. And Lani's photos were especially helpful. They brought back memories of a time when it seemed professing Christians on a whole were more careful about avoiding potential involvement in slander and libel. Gothard and others like him who were influencers of their day, but have since fallen, obviously took advantage of that. But by casting off restraint, ignoring facts, evidence, and due process to advance a narrative, the way some of today's Christian influencers are proving to be just as disturbing, even more so. It says, excepts and links may be used if full clear credit is given with specific direction to the original content. I am going to put the link for this in my, I'm giving full credit to, of course, this writer. And so I think we've learned a very valuable lesson here. The lesson is you always need to find out the truth. The truth. And it just goes to show that you can make any photo tell the story or the narrative that you want it to. So I hope that's helped you in some way. That is the full story behind this photo. And as I said, whatever you think about John MacArthur, or, you know, it's really unfair to have people's names brought up, and I guess I don't want to use the word slander, but that's essentially what it is. I mean, he's been linked to somebody, and all the evidence shows that it's one person. But as I said, the writer has his own bias, but I'm actually really impressed by how he's done it. He's really gone in and investigated. He's done what a proper journalist should do. So please go and have a look, have a read of it, of your own time. And I just hope if you're Katie Joy or a Katie Joy supporter or follower, that, you know, you might want to look into what she says a little bit more. For those of you that don't like Katie Joy, the story seems to back up everything that everyone says about her. But at the end of the day, you need to make up your own mind, and you have to be able to trust yourself and trust your own judgment. So I hope that, as I said, I hope that's helpful for you, and I hope that you'll hit like and subscribe, and that you'll look forward to seeing my next video. I'll be back very soon with more. Bye for now.